Rental arbitrage. What is it and how do you insure it? Darren Pettyjohn here, co-founder of Proper Insurance, the nation's leading insurer of short-term rental properties on Airbnb and VRBO. And we're going to talk about rental arbitrage insurance today. Now, rental arbitrage has really exploded in the last 5 years, primarily due to the growth of Airbnb. Basically, a tenant long-term rents a property from a landlord, and they then re-rent or release that property on a short-term basis on Airbnb or VRBO, hence the term arbitrage. From an insurance perspective, it can get complicated very, very quickly because you have multiple parties involved. You have a guest, you have a tenant, you have a landlord, and it gets confusing. Thankfully, since 2015, we have been writing Airbnb rental arbitrage insurance policies. So we have seen just about every property claim, liability claim, lost business revenue, business interruption claim that you could see. So we're going to clear up some confusion and really get into the details today. The first thing we need to do is define what exactly is rental arbitrage from an insurance perspective. There's a lot of confusion with rental arbitrage and co-hosting. Rental arbitrage is two separate parties involved. You have the owner of the property who then leases the property to an entity or a person, and then that person re-rents or releases that property on a short-term basis. The key is the landlord or the property owner is not involved in the short-term rental business operation at all. They are not involved in the Airbnb business. Their interest is a long-term lease, and the arbitrageur or the rental arbitrage host, their interest is running the short-term rental business out of the property. Co-hosting, it's really more of a management situation where the owner of the property and the co-host are essentially in business together. And there's typically a commission that's paid, and there might be a lot more commingling of business activities, which really needs to be addressed from a different insurance perspective. So what do you do for rental arbitrage insurance? We love examples. So there's an incredible amount of trust in the industry between the general public or consumers and insurance agents. It's no different than a lawyer or real estate agent. You're never going to know all the details as a consumer. We're talking about a 50 to 100 page insurance contract, so you rely on an agent to provide you with good information. And unfortunately, there's just so much confusion and borderline misrepresentation on Airbnb rental arbitrage insurance. We want to clear it up today. So let's just use an example. Let's assume it's a typical landlord situation where there's an owner of a property who long-term rents that property to a tenant for 12 months. They sign a 12-month lease and they take a $2,500 security deposit. This has been happening for hundreds of years. It's a very common situation. Now, when the tenant checks out of the property 12 months later, when their lease is up, the owner of the property, the landlord, discovers $20,000 in damage to the interior of the unit. Let's assume there are holes in the doors, so the doors need to replace. The blinds are broken. The kitchen floor has essentially been destroyed. All this damage adds up to $20,000 in damage. What is the recourse for the landlord? What does the landlord do at that point? Do they call their insurance company and file an insurance claim for damage caused by a tenant? Or do they sue the tenant and keep the security deposit? The answer is number two. They sue the tenant, typically in small claims court, or they go after them in the general court and keep their security deposit. Fundamentally, everyone needs to understand that a landlord or a dwelling policy does not provide insurance coverage for damage to the property caused by that tenant. It doesn't exist. It's not written into the contract. So we just want to clear that confusion up and kind of set the table here to start to think about how would insurance for rental arbitrage work. If we think about it, we have the landlord who owns the property, and then we have the tenant, and then we have the guest. So assuming there's damage or there's a liability issue, you really want to look into the details and determine where does this insurance coverage exist. Again, thankfully, Proper Insurance identified this trend all the way back in 2015. So we have a fantastic insurance product that the rental arbitrage host can purchase from us, and then the landlord maintains their regular insurance as a landlord. Another important concept here is that there's two separate interests interests involved in this transaction between you, the arbitrage host or the arbitrageur, and the landlord. The landlord has an interest and you have an interest. So a quick example there is, let's say that the landlord is cheap and they decide to not fix the roof at the property. The roof is 20 years old and they just decide, you know what, I don't have the money to fix the roof. But then all of a sudden there's a roof collapse due to weight of ice and snow, or maybe it's a cabin in the mountains at a ski resort. You as the arbitrageur are cleaning the property and you get injured. Well, your recourse is to go after the landlord because clearly the landlord is negligent in not fixing their roof. So this kind of gives you an idea of there needs to be two separate insurance policies here. The landlord insurance policy and what their interests are, and then the short-term rental arbitrageur and their insurance policy. Now, there's a nice bunch of add-ons that the arbitrageur can put on there that actually also protect the landlord, which is a nice little piece of our policy, but a core concept is that there needs to be, or there should be, two insurance policies in place. So let's talk about what's actually covered under Proper's Airbnb or rental arbitrage policy. First, we want to look at it from a property insurance perspective. So damage caused by a guest, damage caused by someone who rents the property on Airbnb, that's number one. So if somebody comes in and damages that property, you can choose limits to provide specific coverage for damage caused by that tenant. Now, an important piece, an important endorsement that we put on there is this damage not only applies to the contents in the property. So this would be the couch, the TV, the dishes, the linens, the decor, all of the personal property or contents in the property, but also the building itself. So worst case scenario, let's say there's a party at the rental, the party gets out of hand and there are a few holes put into the drywall. Let's assume it's a $5,000 claim, damage to the building itself. Now let's think. Again, the landlord is not going to file an insurance claim on their policy because there's no coverage. You need to have that coverage as a rental arbitrage host to be able to file a claim. So pretty unique coverage that Proper offers. Again, property coverage for not only the contents in the property, but also to the building itself. Most of our clients choose 20, 50, 100,000, depending on the size of the property. You actually get to choose your limit that you want for property coverage. The second and most important piece is liability. So our policy comes with $1 million of business liability, also known as commercial general liability. And what this does is this protects you as the rental arbitrage host for any bodily injury or property damage that you could be held liable for. So let's think of this. An Airbnb guest stays at the property and they slip and fall down the stairs because there's a loose handrail on the stairs. They get injured, they come back and sue you, the arbitrage host, for their injury. Our policy would respond to that. We actually do have a $2 million limit as well. $1 million is not what it used to be, and a lot of our clients actually feel more comfortable with $2 million in coverage. Now, the beauty here is that you then add the property owner onto your policy as additionally insured, because what happens in a lawsuit is the person on the deed of the property, the person who actually owns the property, is often pulled into the lawsuit even though they really didn't have anything to do with the injury. Again, let's assume someone falls down the stairs, they sue you as the arbitrageur, but they also name the landlord or property owner in the lawsuit. Because we add the landlord or property owner as additionally insured, they have protection under your policy. This is a really big selling point when you're talking with landlords, to have them allow you to do short-term rental arbitrage at their properties. The third component, which is often overlooked, is business interruption coverage. Okay, so let's think about this. You're going out on a limb and long-term renting a property from a landlord for potentially 12 or 24 months. Well, what happens if there's damage to that property which makes it unrentable or uninhabitable and your business is shut down? You no longer can re-rent that as a short-term rental. So that's what's called business revenue coverage. Quick example, broken water pipes. Let's assume you rent a property and the water pipes break and there's water damage inside the unit and it takes 90 days to to fix the property. You can actually file a business income claim with proper insurance for your lost rental revenue. Now, the landlord in that scenario would obviously file an insurance claim with their carrier because of the broken water pipes. Again, separate interest. It's not your responsibility as an Airbnb rental arbitrage host to fix the water pipes. That's the landlord's responsibility. Now, how do I use insurance to actually pitch landlords? Or a better way to phrase that question is use insurance to pitch a landlord to allow you to do rental arbitrage. Number one, you can tell the landlord that you carry your own insurance, and your insurance actually provides damage caused by a guest, which is an upgrade to the insurance that they have now. Remember, the landlord is carrying a landlord or dwelling insurance policy, which provides no coverage. So this is actually an added enhancement that you're bringing to the table. Number two is you're going to add the landlord as additionally insured onto your policy. So let's use a dog bite example. Very, very common claim. A lot of people don't realize, but dog bites are one of the top 3 liability claims in the United States. Over $1 billion was paid in 2022 for dog bite liability claims. Let's assume an Airbnb host brings a dog and the dog bites the neighbor. And the neighbor not only sues you as the business owner of the Airbnb, they sue the renter and they sue the landlord. Again, because you've added that landlord as additionally insured onto your policy, they would not only have legal defense, but possibly $1 million of occurrence settlement as well. So it works out really well, and it's really a good selling point. Landlords love the idea that they can lock up a 6, 12, 24-month term lease, but they just want to know that the property is covered from not only a property standpoint, but also a liability insurance standpoint. So is rental arbitrage legal? This is a question that comes up a lot. Now, if you go to Airbnb, looking at it from their perspective first, there is no word arbitrage in their terms and conditions. So it kind of makes sense that they really haven't publicly addressed this very much, but there's no specific language in Airbnb's terms and conditions that says rental arbitrage is illegal. So you're good from that standpoint. The second piece is arbitrage itself. Taking an asset and essentially simultaneously selling that asset in another market, hence the long-term rental versus the short-term, and the price differential is the arbitrage. There's no laws that we know of on the books that state this is an illegal operation. So leasing a property and then releasing it on a short-term basis, to the best of our knowledge, there is no federal, state, or local laws that state this is illegal. With that said, there are short-term rental regulations that are happening all across the United States. Some communities require you to have a rental permit. They require you to possibly have a noise monitoring device. They require you to have minimum liability requirements. So there is a set of rules and regulations you have to follow in order to get a permit. Otherwise, you would be in violation. They typically define short-term rentals as 30 days or less. So it's critically important, if you're looking to invest in the rental arbitrage business, you need to go to the local government website. You can find this on Google. You can search short-term rental ordinance and the city that you're looking at investing in, and it will tell you whether or not there is an ordinance or not. So moving on here, how much does commercial renters insurance or rental arbitrage insurance from proper cost? Relatively speaking, it's very price competitive when you look at it. It is definitely not a barrier to entry for people to get involved in the Airbnb or rental arbitrage business. Naturally, it would depend on the limits that you choose. We have some rental arbitrage clients who generate $50,000 to $100,000 in revenue per year, so their insurance might be a little more expensive because they have high business revenue income limits. Others are short-term renting condos. Others are doing single-family homes. So it really varies depending on the limits of insurance you choose for your rental arbitrage business, but it's very competitively priced. It can be as low as $80,000, $90,000, $100 a month all the way up to $150, $200 a month. So get with your proper agent, get a quote to find out how much rental arbitrage actually costs. Let's now jump into some common rental arbitrage insurance questions. One of the top questions we get is, does renter's insurance cover rental arbitrage? The answer is no, it does not. Renter's insurance, also known as an HO4 renter's policy, specifically covers the renter's personal contents and their personal liability. It is not a business policy. A lot of information out there on the internet that you can buy a renter's insurance policy and be just fine from a rental arbitrage perspective, and it's very misleading. The answer is no. A renter's insurance policy is not going to protect you from a business perspective in regards to rental arbitrage insurance. Think about it this way. Let's assume you rent or lease a space to open a restaurant. Airbnb rental arbitrage is really no different if you think about it. You're renting or leasing a space to run a business. So would the restaurant buy personal renter's insurance for the restaurant? The answer is no. They would buy a business owner's policy or a commercial policy, which is exactly what proper insurance sells. Another question that comes up often is non-guest caused damage and how insurance would apply to that. Easy example. Let's assume that you are a rental arbitrage host and you long-term rent a property from a landlord. And then there is a tree that falls and damages the roof of that rental property, which then makes that property unrentable or uninhabitable. There may be a period of 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 months while the roof has to be repaired and you're out of business because clearly Airbnb guests are not going to be renting a property with a broken roof. So in the event of that, you can file a business interruption or a business revenue claim with proper insurance for your lost rental income. It's one of the main reasons people choose proper insurance for their rental arbitrage insurance. Another question we get a lot, why is liability insurance so important for rental arbitrage hosts? Liability is extremely important because they are running a hotel business. What that means is you have a duty to provide a safe premises for your patrons or your tenants. A lot of people do not realize that short-term rental or Airbnb properties are subject to the same hospitality laws that a hotel would be. So make sure you have the right liability insurance for your Airbnb rental arbitrage business.